Hey everyone, welcome to a talk about storytelling and why it's so important for innovation. Welcome to Invincible Innovation Live Show. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm Mazor, Kario, product innovation and value creation expert, and I'll be your host. And today I have a very special guest, Steven. Hey Steven,
Hi, Adi. Thank you so much for having me.
so happy that you're here. Stephen Taylor is the CEO of Untold Content, and we talked in the past. I'm sure it's going to be really interesting. We're live on YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook, and you're so invited to join the discussion. And now we can start. So we're talking about storytelling, and I feel like that's a really big buzzword out there. It's like in marketing and branding and pitching and public speaking, content. So how would you define like storytelling?
So I really glad that you asked that question because this is a current piece that I'm actually working on right now. Is what is storytelling and what are stories and what's the differentiation between that and narratives? And because it's really important to know that they are different, and so you have to come at them from a different perspective. So for me, storytelling at its basics is more about personal experiences. So you can have stories that are fictional, that are created, that are based on certain attributes or things that are going on. Um, but it's around personal experiences. A lot of them, when it comes to an organization, it can be very disjointed. They're broken. They are kind of like snippets from across different parts of an organization. On the other side, a narrative is something that is constructed. It has a purpose. It has an objective. And so you can think of them like narratives are a lot of times top down, and then your stories are a lot of times very bottom up. And so when they meet together, they're really powerful. When the narratives come down and meet adjoining stories, so they can pull out stories from the organization. But it's important to know that when you are talking about branding, most of the time those are very narrative focused. But when you talk about organizational behavior and culture, a lot of times that's very story focused coming in from the bottom. So that's how
Yeah.
I think about those, especially in the work that I do around innovation storytelling.
Yeah. So it's good to see like because like a few like months back I talked to Abigail and she's teaching people to pitch and
Hmm.
we talked about something very similar but she sees it in the content of creating a story and transferring the story and it's more like theater to her. That's how she sees that. So
Yes.
it's different.
But in those pitches usually have a very specific framework. They follow a very specific pattern and they have a very objective, like a very focused objective. I need to get money, I need to get buy in. And so it's not necessarily very story like in its makeup, but when you actually have someone sharing an experience, then you get a lot of that. There's a lot of more of those story attributes getting pulled into that narrative. So, what we talk about at Untold is actually how you take narratives and infuse stories into those. And so that brings those, you have something that's very strategic and objective focused, and actually pull in something that has that personal experience that makes people really get excited about what you're doing.
I feel that when you're telling your own story, it's much more emotional than just saying like promotional marketing stuff.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah, absolutely. There's a great example that we use. So we have a training called innovation storytelling, and it's more of a workshop. You come in, you get to go and try a bunch of different storytelling techniques. Because we've had a podcast for the last 2 years called Untold Stories of Innovation, and in that podcast, what we've really found is that there is no one way to tell a great story. That stories are very contextual. So you can't just go in and say, "Here, I'm going to use the same framework. I'm going to use the hero's journey, and that's what the story framework I'm going to use every single time." Real life doesn't work that way. And so when people are sharing their experiences, they usually don't fall back into those very traditional frameworks. They use more fragmented story patterns. So when we go through our training experience, we actually bring both the frameworks and the story patterns together. Sorry, I talk a lot with my hands, so I'm like showing.
It's
I'm
fine.
looking at my desk, but we bring these frameworks and these patterns together, and we show how they can interplay. So you can make a whole set of different types of stories based on your very specific context. So let me give you an example. Um, Matt Doyle, who is the one of the senior VPs at Procter and Gamble, shares a story about crest white strips. When he shares his story, and I'm not going to do a good job sharing it, the
Mm.
way that he shares it is he says like the challenge is that it was really hard to keep the whitening agent in the mouth because you have all the saliva, and the saliva always kind of clears out whatever you put into the mouth. So it makes it a real challenge to put something there that's going to do chemistry and actually keep it in place for as long as you need. So they had this action. So they had a challenge. The action that they took was this long, what he takes you through is a really like a 2-minute serendipity story. And then the results is that they developed crest white strips. So it goes challenge, action, results in a very traditional story framework. However, that action, that serendipity story is so rich because what he talks about that's really interesting is that um, he was the head of R&D, I think, in the oral care division at P&G when they were working on crest white strips. There was someone in the lab who was working on the chemistry who's having this really hard problem. They were in the cafeteria, and the scientist working on the project was talking with someone that was working